As a wave across the land, we are moving. It takes one step, it takes your voice saying, I am not hearing if you are not naming it. I am not stopping if you are not changing it. Here are my hands, let's see what they're making. In the morning, in the rise up, there's a bridge from all that's been in the dawning. The vines are pushing through the pavement. We were born of burning hearts. We are tearing off the reins. From the ground up we will build it. From the clouds above we'll rain it. From the crowd up we will raise it. From the ground up.
I'm Nisha Moodley, and this is Devotion, the podcast about showing up in new ways to weave a new world together. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Devotion, episode 1. I can't believe I get to say that. I am Nisha Moodley, and in case this is our first time being connected, before we dive in, I want to take this moment to say hello and to introduce myself and the podcast a little more. I am a mixed race woman of Tamil Indian descent on my father's side and Northwestern European descent on my mother's. I currently live and work on the land of the Coast Miwok peoples, which is the land of redwood trees and coyotes and hawks in what is now known as Mill Valley, California. And I grew up on Coast Salish land, the land of Gary Oaks covered in soft moss and lichen, the land of ravens and orcas in so-called Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. I have a partner named Noah, and I'm the mother of a magical, amazing 3-year-old named Raven Deva. I'm also the founder of Global Sisterhood Day, and I'm an integrative leadership coach. And what that means is that my work integrates holistic health coaching and executive coaching with transformational modalities such as breath work, family constellations, and energy work. And it's all woven together in service of folks developing their unique leadership and operating from a more deeply integrated place. And as part of that work, I facilitate online courses and communities, and I have mastermind groups and trainings, and I have led many, many retreats, which I deeply and dearly love and miss terribly. And after we get through these COVID times and are able to gather again, I can't wait to get back to working with small groups again. And at the time that I'm recording this, we are sheltering in place. And my family, Noah, Raven, and myself have been sheltering in place just outside my hometown for several months now here in Canada. And at this time, we're also in the midst of what I pray is the beginning of a global uprising around racial injustice and all of the various isms that perpetuate it. And as my friend Jillian Walker said, and I'm going to really have to paraphrase this, so this is not a direct quote, but a month or so ago, I remember her writing a post and talking about how, yes, these may be weird times, but times have been weird. If we look at our history, we will see that things haven't been working for a long time, and things have been deeply oppressive for many folks for a long time. So the way that I really feel about these times is that they are sobering and clarifying and have the potential to be deeply transformative as well, if we keep going and if we go all the way. So this is part of why I called this podcast Devotion, because I really deeply believe that for us to weave a new world, and yes, a new, greater world, but also the world of our homes and communities and families and through our work, it will require us to embrace devotion, and in doing so, to unhook from duty, which most, maybe all, of us have been socialized towards. So to me, duty says, do what I say when I say it. Don't rock the boat. Fall in line. Follow the rules. Be good. Don't be disruptive. Do the right thing, but the right thing is defined by some external authority figure. Don't be embarrassing. Don't be disruptive. I could go on and on. Whereas devotion to me has such a wildly different quality to it. Now, first of all, I'm a bit of a word nerd, and I love etymology and geeking out on the etymology of words. And devotion comes from the word consecrare, which means to consecrate, which is derived from the root word that means sacred. So as I see it, devotion is the protection and tending of the sacred. And it's a commitment to loving through our actions, right? To love as a verb. As I experience it, true devotion is rooted and regenerative and relational. And I want to call it revolutionary, but I actually think it's more of a remembering. And I believe that for us to weave a new world, it'll require each of us to show up in devotion for our part of the work. And when I say our part of the work, I'm really reminded of a story from a few years ago. A friend of mine went to support the Standing Rock Sioux people at the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. And when she came home and shared stories from that experience, something that really stuck out to me and really struck me very deeply, because here I am retelling this story today, was that for the folks who really came in a good way, right, and came to follow the lead of those who really had the most at stake, right, the Sioux people and the land, the people who were guarding the land, that those folks who came in a good way and those who were already there and had much at stake really found their place and were shown their place in the work of the resistance. And so, of course, there were the folks who were on the front lines, who were taking blows from authority figures on the other end, who were really at the literal front lines defending their water and their land. And then you had the folks who were also on the front lines, but who were documenting the experience, who were letting folks back home, wherever home might be for each of us, know what was going on there, really. And then you had the folks that were back in the camps, and you had people who were cooking and people who were making medicines and, offering medic services to the folks on the front lines. You had people who were praying. You had people who were taking care back home, I'm sure, of the children. You had people who were offering counsel. And so it really stuck out to me that there were roles for each person, and those roles were important, right? And I think we tend to think of leadership as being on the front lines. But to me, part of showing up in devotion, really showing up in our leadership, is discerning how and where and when to show up. And those answers will be unique to each of us. And I talk about leadership and I teach about leadership, but the concept of leadership and what it means to be a leader is really loaded. So I want to speak a little bit to where I'm coming from when I talk about leadership. One, I believe that we are all leaders in different ways at different times, and that when we're devoted to showing up in our leadership, that part of that process is discerning where and how our unique gifts and expression and talents and voice can be offered. And sometimes this means showing up and being at the front, and sometimes it means being at the back, and sometimes in the spotlight, and sometimes passing the mic, and sometimes working quietly in the background. And I believe that rallying and resting and receiving can all be expressions of leadership when we're really embodying our leadership, right? When they're not acts of collapse or avoidance or dominance. Which kind of leads me to my second point, which is that it's been my experience that when we're really stepping into embracing and embodying our leadership, which for me is lifetime work, it requires a complete shift in our relationship to power. Because true power is relational, not hierarchical. True power is not dominance and power over and oppression and suppression, and therefore neither is true leadership. True power is deeply relational. It's found in the embrace of our individual and collective wholeness, in our roots and our connection with the earth and our bodies and our well and loving ancestors, and it's found in community. And therefore, as I see it, the path of cultivating our leadership is about all of that as well. And I think we'll have a lot to talk about here because unmapping from hierarchical power narratives and dynamics and remembering our intrinsic wholeness and liberating our full expression and cultivating nourishing community and embodying our unique leadership is a whole lifetime of work. So, as I said, we will have a lot to talk about here. And today I wanted to really start us off by sharing some of the edges that I'm walking in my own devotion, right? Like what my growth edges are right now. And part of this is because we're going to be having lots of tender explorations around devotion throughout this time together. And I'm happy to go first and lay it out on the table, be open, be honest. And also because I believe that we can learn so much from witnessing one another. And even though we are having distinct and different experiences, each of us, there are often overlapping threads and ways that through sharing our stories, we can really learn from one another and also spark knowings inside of us, even if there aren't things that are specifically spoken. They can perhaps awaken some knowing in each of us. So the first place that I feel to share that I am sort of at my growth edges around my own devotion is with this podcast. I really believe that each of our creations has its own soul. And the best way that I can explain this is that I'm a mom, and I'm aware, and I have been aware, that my child, though he comes from me or came through me, depending on how you look at it, he isn't me, and I don't own him. We are having our own life experiences. He is a sovereign being. I am a sovereign being. We are deeply and intimately connected and related, but we are not one and the same. And therefore, he has his own unique life path. And as I see it, part of my role as his mother, as his parent, is to connect with him relationally as a human being. Of course, to protect him and care for him, but also to connect with him on a soul level and understand more about who he is becoming and to support that becoming, really to get out of the way of his becoming. And, the same I find is true with my creations, with our creations. They are not us. They are not even really ours. But my role with all of my creations, and right now I'm talking about this podcast specifically, is to really understand what it wants to become and then to allow myself to grow up, to become who I need to become in order to hold it, in order to create it and bring it forth. And So a couple of things have come into play for me and become lessons for me around this podcast. One has really been partnering with the podcast and trusting its timing and trusting the right timing of its manifestation in the world. My father died last November, which is when the podcast was supposed to launch. Well, it was actually supposed to launch, or I thought it was supposed to launch a year ago, just over a year ago. And then I thought it was supposed to launch last November, but then my father passed away. And then even more recently, we had some snafus along the way with bringing it forth. And I've had to really look at the tension that I've held in my body around my plans. Like, this is my plan. I am committed to the timeline that I have created. I am going to see it through. And not really being in a very deeply relational space with this podcast. And, it's called devotion. And so I've been in devotion school ever since I decided to bring this thing into the world. And really noticing that tension in my body was all about duty. And to come into a place of deeper relationship with the podcast as its own creation has meant unmapping my body in some ways from that habituated duty and coming into a deeper state of devotion. And one of the ways that duty has shown up for me has been in perfectionism. Like, really being driven to get it right, to do it right, to get the perfect audio quality, all the things. There's some of that still present right now, even as I am speaking these words. And I'm really reminded that part of what fuels that perfectionism, part of it, not all of it, but part of what fuels that perfectionism is that I'm just doing something new. And it's kind of scary. I've never done this before. And one of the things that I say to my clients at times, and I have to remind myself as well too, is that when we're doing something new, we don't have confidence most likely in our ability. It's just not there. We haven't road tested, our ability with this task or project or whatever we're doing. So I don't have that to lean on. So what can I lean on? And what I've found is that the most rock solid thing to lean on when we don't have confidence in our ability is confidence in our devotion. And really connecting to what is the bigger why for this creation. In this case for me, this podcast. What is the bigger why? What is its purpose? What purpose do I hope it serves in the world, in my world, for the people who hear it? And then to find my devotion to that and have confidence in that instead of my ability. So the podcast has been one place. Another place where I have been really stretched and growing in my devotion recently has been around decolonization and ancestral healing work. I really deeply believe that true justice is liberation. If we see justice all the way through, then where we get to is liberation. And that true liberation requires decolonization. So if we look at any of the systems, any of the oppressive systems or structures or mentalities, that we hold in our own minds, bodies, in our world, in our societies, that part of the pathway to real justice is decolonizing, right? Experiencing things through a totally different lens. We're seeing this right now with the reimagining of policing. If we let go of the belief that we need external authority figures to enforce things in often harmful ways, and reimagine what community could look like, really. To me, that is an aspect of the work of decolonization, that whole exploration. For me, as a mixed race person with divorced parents, both of whom came from very different cultures and very different religious backgrounds, belonging has always been a central question in my life. And my maternal lineage and my paternal lineage actually both have very recent immigration. So my on my mother's side, it was just a few generations ago that our family immigrated to Canada from Europe. And my father actually immigrated to Canada to escape apartheid in South Africa in the early 70s. And then several generations before that, my family had been moved from India to South Africa as indentured laborers. So this is a history that many folks share, not everybody, of course. Some folks are living indigenous on their indigenous land. And then many of you perhaps, are in a similar boat to me with immigration, migration, whether forced or choiceful, as part of our ancestry. So again, this is another aspect that has woven in for me around this question of belonging. And for me, decolonization and ancestral healing work very much includes an exploration around belonging. And some of that for me has been through doing ancestral healing work. So shout out to my guide in that work, Geeta Devi. And in connecting with and receiving guidance from my way back well and loving ancestors. And I've also recently joined a decolonial healing collective with Dr. Rosales Mesa, and I'm in a Sanskrit class right now with my beloved friend Shivani Hawkins. And there's so much to do around decolonization and ancestral healing work. I think that many of us, and I include myself in this very much so, are just beginning to scratch the surface of this work. And, I'm naming ancestral healing work, but I think that decolonization work runs through every facet of our lives and livelihoods in society. And so I don't want to imply that it's limited to, or that a high expression of it is ancestral healing work. I think there are many expressions that are deeply necessary and crucial and beautiful in decolonization work. And that includes calls for justice that we hear today. So for me, a couple of ways that this work, this devotional edge that I'm walking around decolonization and ancestral healing work, one of the ways that this is being expressed for me right now is in really owning my privilege across the many axes of privilege that I hold, and using that privilege for good, and noticing where I don't, and noticing where I, want to collapse. And also remembering and reweaving my connection to my roots. And I often see that part of the conversation missing in the conversation around privilege and appropriation. And they don't always have to be part of the same conversation, of course. But I think part of what many of us, part of the work that we are here to do and that we need to do in order to unmap from and reimagine these systems that harm, is a really deep remembrance and reweaving of our roots. And both the painful histories of our lineages and the beautiful, life-giving histories of our lineages. So I'm saying that this is a place where I'm at the edge of my devotion right now, but the truth is I feel like ask me in 10 years and I'll still be in this work, and there's so much to explore. But that's something that I'm really devoted to right now. Another place that's really up for me in my life right now that's been pushing my edges is around a question that we are in as a family unit around where to live. And I live in the United States currently. I am a green card holder and I am Canadian. I'm a Canadian citizen born in Canada, as I mentioned. And Canada has a lot going for it. It's not a perfect country. It's got its own, sketchy history and still a lot going on today that needs resolution and reform and reimagining and reconciling. And also, it's my homeland. It's the place where I was born, and it's the place where I lived for the first half of my life so far. And being here for the last several months during COVID times and sheltering in place, we've been living, as I said, with my mom and my stepdad. Did I say that? If I didn't, that's a thing. We've been living in my mother and stepfather's basement suite, which has been beautiful in ways, challenging in ways. And one of the ways it's been both beautiful and challenging is that there has been a lot of encouragement for us to come back to Canada. And from Noah as well, he seems to be on board for this. And I have all of my reasons that sounds wonderful, and I have all of my own personal reasons too for why it's challenging. I have so much community in California where we live. I have my business there. It was a very arduous, long journey to get my citizenship, and I was one of the lucky ones, being a native English speaker from Canada. I can only imagine, really, truly only imagine, how hard it would be for someone in a very different position from me. And still, it was a long and intense process. And so, again, just all of my own reasons that I have for not wanting to leave, but also, reasons for feeling drawn to Canada. And the lesson, though, for me really has been and is continuing to be around the ways that I have historically and can still collapse my own inner knowing, my own deeper calling, my own desires in the face of other people's desires. And I've been doing this for so long, I probably should have a degree in it. Funny, not funny. But, I was the child of a father who was an alcoholic and a mother who struggled with depression. And I learned very early on, whether they wanted me to or not, to become very pleasable. I will be and do what you want me to be and do if that will make you happy so that we can all be okay. And so for me, it's been significant to be in a really close container, right, in the same house as my mother and stepfather, and my partner, and all of their desires kind of lining up with one another, and mine not quite there. And what I've been devoted to in this is having conversations with Noah where we really agree to move as partners, to link arms, and instead of it be his desires and his sensibilities and his, pro-con list versus my desires and my sensibilities and my pro-con list, instead it's, okay, we're choosing what's right and true for us, for the we. So that's been really powerful. Second thing that's been really powerful is for me to be deeply devoted inside of myself to not taking action that doesn't feel true. And when I say true, I don't mean, it checks all the boxes or it doesn't feel scary. It might feel scary, it might feel intense, and still feel true. But really being devoted to only moving in the directions that feel true or in the direction that feels true. And the third thing has been a real commitment to trusting my body. Where does my body want to rest? Where does my body want to land? Where does my body say, yes, this place is where I want to be? And it takes a lot for me, and I think for many of us, in an overculture that would have us perhaps mistrust our bodies or believe that that's an inferior way to make decisions, to actually say, no, this is critical, this is meaningful, this is beautiful and profound and significant, where I unwind. When I look at my child and see, he is free, he's expressing an embodied freedom here, which is also related to how I'm feeling, right? And also my partner. So those things, right? The conversations that have us be on the same page, being devoted to not taking action that doesn't feel true, and also trusting my body. Those have been some really big lessons and guideposts for me in this exploration. And then the final thing that I want to share, the place where I'm up against my edge of devotion right now, is around embracing my pace. And I think I first said the phrase embrace your pace about 10 years ago or so. And I'm still learning what that means. Really, I'm still learning, like peeling back layers of an onion. Oh, this is what this means. And then I find another layer, right? And so to embrace my pace, I have to unwind enough to actually discover what my pace is beyond conditioning, beyond, the narratives of competition or insufficiency, not enoughness, scarcity. And one of the big things that has been tied into this for me is money. I am the main breadwinner in our family, and so I've felt a tremendous amount of pressure for the last several years to provide for the family. And it's not a pressure really that anyone has put on me. I think Noah would be quite happy actually to live in a hammock, truly. And, we've made choices together, and this pressure has felt really intense for me at times to make enough to provide. And often it's kicked on for me this intense kind of hustle mode, this intense energy of, at all costs, suck it up and do what it takes. And so that is another piece that has created a sort of pressure, urgency in my system. And another thing is just our social issues. There is an urgency that gets created for me in my system around injustice in the world. When I witness it, when I am aware of it, often what happens for me is I'm then activated into, okay, it's time to get in formation and do what needs to be done around this. And so for me, it's been and continues to be a deep exploration of how can I be engaged, especially around things that do hold some urgency. The movement for Black lives, it's been necessary, needed, and an issue for a long time. We could maybe say since the beginning of colonization. And this is not news to Black people. This is not news to many people of color. This is a reality, a daily reality. And there is something to when there is enough collective activation around something that there's a moment of opportunity to create enough momentum and keep that momentum going. So a couple of things that I have been exploring within myself around embracing my pace. The first one, and if any of this resonates with you, I encourage you to do this even as I speak, is to feel both the energy of urgent in my body. What does urgency feel like? And then what is the energy of sustained? Urgent and sustained. And what happens when I bring those two energies together? What is the embodiment of both urgent and sustained? Because I think that that in part is where I can find my pace at this time. And also to show up in a way that is regenerative, that is sustainable, that allows me to keep going. And it doesn't mean, I don't believe that we necessarily are one note, that we'll always be able to give or bring the same amount of energy. But also burnout is a real thing. And so how do I stay present and engaged and not go into that hyper urgency that creates burnout, but also not go into collapse or apathy? Neither of those things is going to be sustainable long term. So that's one thing, feeling urgent and sustained in my body at the same time, those two energies. The second thing that I've been playing with, exploring, is placing my needs above my desires and placing needs above desires. So there's a shaman who I have worked with before named Javier Reguero. And in a recent podcast episode, they were talking about this, right? Placing needs above desires. And so there can be an urgent need in my community or in our world or for myself, sleep, for example, and letting that need take precedence above, well, I just want to crank this thing out before I go to bed, or I wish so-and-so would say it nicer, The need is more important than that desire, and allowing that to be true for me has been a way to, or exploring that has been a way to embrace my pace more deeply and unmap from some of the sort of toxic ambition into a deeper, more real devotion. And the third thing has been remembering in my body what true sustenance feels like. And this is also a place where the money thing ties in. And what I've found for myself and realized for myself is that a lot of the scarcity feeling had been driven by money and my relationship with money, even when there has been enough, And money has been the primary foundational relationship for me that has created either the feeling of sustenance or scarcity. And being here actually in Canada for 4 months with very little expenses and a lot of childcare and nature and gardening has started to really remap that for me in a pretty significant way. I'm starting to place other things at that ground level baseline sustenance that aren't just money. So I highly recommend, if this resonates for you, wherever you can interact with the abundance, the generosity of this earth, whether it's putting your hands in soil or going for a walk in the park and just, watching flowers in bloom. Wherever you can, if you can, interact with the generosity of the earth and just feeling how nourishing and sustaining that the earth is for us. And even for me, just savoring my food more, slowing down more and savoring it more, and experiencing the deep beauty and sustenance of that one bite has been, again, shifting that relationship from scarcity to sustenance. And that has had a significant impact on me embracing my pace more deeply and getting out of hustle mode and hustle mentality. So those are a few places where I've been really deepening my devotion up against the edges of my devotion. I'm sure I'll have more to share over time, but those are the first places that are coming forward for me to share about today. So thank you for listening, for witnessing. I hope that in me sharing some of these intimate aspects of my life, they have woven some threads of remembrance for you as well. Thank you so much again for being here. I'm really excited to continue this journey with you and have more beautiful, deep, and wide-ranging conversations along the way. Thanks again. Thank you so much for being here, beloved. I want to extend my heartfelt invitation for you to join our podcast Inner Circle for free at devotionpodcast.com. You'll receive access to show notes and free bonuses, including my favorite guided meditation when you sign up. If you loved this episode, please share it, subscribe, and I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review. Our mixing and sound design is by Lou Janot, brand design by Neverland Studio, episode images by Liv Haddon, and our theme song is From the Ground Up by Ayla Nerio. Thank you all, and thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful, and I'll talk to you soon.
We were born up in a race. From clouds above we're raining. From the crowd up we were raising. From the ground up we were building. From the clouds above we're raining. From the crowd up we were raising.